Hello, everyone, and welcome to another advanced shooting presentation. Today, we will be going over and discussing about working with learning suggestions. And the contents of this presentation will be discussing about learning, what are learning suggestions, how they work, understanding the unlearnable violations, how entities are learned, the learning from responses feature, how this works and how this can affect the suggestions that ASM can make, and the enforcement readiness periods. And we will finish with a quick summary. Well, the learning suggestion helps you build a security policy, particularly if you are building a security policy manually. This means that when the learning mode is set to manual. When you send client traffic through the ASM, the learning data provides information on requests or responses that do not comply with the current security policy and have triggered a violation. So the reason for triggering a violation can be either an actual attack on the site or a false positive. Typically, these are typically seen during the process of building the policy. So the system suggests adding legitimate entities such as URLs, file types, or parameters that often appears in requests. In some cases, the learning suggestion may contain recommendations to relax the security policy, to disable an attack signature or a particular violation. So when this happens, make sure to relax the policy only where false positives occur, and not in cases where it is a real attack, the one that caused that violation. And if you are generating a security policy automatically, but you need to bear in mind that ASM handles much of the learning for you in that case. The learning screen shows only the elements that the security policy is in the process of learning, or those which require manual intervention to be resolved. So let's go and check now our lab environment for this presentation and the test that we are going to perform. We have a simple virtual server listening in port 80. And now we are going to create a security policy. And we'll be assigning that to the our virtual server. We'll click on create a new policy. We will assign a name. The policy template that we are going to use is fundamental. For now, we are going not to assign it to any virtual. The learning mode that we are going to use is manual. And the enforcement mode set to transparent. Everything else we will leave it by default. The signatures are going to be in staging. The enforcement readiness period is will be 7 days. And the policy is case sensitive and differentiate between HTTP and HTTPS. So we click in create and we'll wait for the policy is created for, and then we will be assigned to our virtual server. Okay, so now that our policy is ready, let's go to our virtual and assign it. Click on the virtual in the security tab. We'll enable that policy. And we will assign the default login profile to log all requests so we can review either legal or illegal requests. Okay, now then our virtual server is ready with the policy applied. Let's send a quick request, simple HTTP GET request using curl, and review the request on the ASM and if it generates any type of learning suggestion. So we were going to use a curl command and send a request to the virtual that is listening on that port. Here we can see that we got the response. So let's go back to our BGP and let's check first the event logs. We can see here our request, simple GET request, and it triggered an attack signature because we are using curl. So now let's review if it generates any type of suggestion. Okay, excellent. So we can see here that we have 3 suggestions already. To add the server technology, the ASM already recognized that we're connecting to a Linux server and the site is served by Apache. And here is also the attack signature detected, the curl. So in this one, it is suggestion to disable the header. This is an example of what is to relax the policy to allow this type of traffic in the case that is expected. Review a few things here on the learning page. So we can see the learning suggestions. Here you can review the request that generated the suggestion. And also the learning score that we are going to review now in our presentation. Let's go back and move forward. Well, next to each suggestion, ASM assigns a learning score. That is what we just saw. That measures the strength of the suggestion by showing a percentage that indicates how close the system is to recommending that you accept that particular suggestion. So the learning score is also influenced by the violation rating. The lower the rating of the violation, the higher the score. Let's do a quick check here so we can see this is the, for this particular request, the violation is 2 and the learning score is 5%. So when if the system is working in automatic learning mode, when the learning score reaches 100%, the system can accept and enforce most of the suggestions by itself. If and when the system enforces the suggestion, depend on which learning modes auto apply setting you have choose. In manual mode, you can accept suggestions manually at any time. If you are using manual learning, when the learning score reaches 100% or before that, if you know that the suggestions are valid, you need to wait for the suggestions to reach 100% to accept it. And the traffic learning screen also displays a violation for which the system does not generate learning suggestions. So typically, these type of violations are related to RFC compliance or on system resources. So the resolution for these violations may be to disable the violation rather than change the configuration. In this case, it will be relaxing the policy. In the system displays this violation along with the learning suggestion to ease the security policy and management task. So going back to our lab, let's send a few requests to check how the ISM and the learning suggestion behave. Different type of requests that we want to send now. So now we will going to use and see connect to that virtual. And right now we will send a request. You can see here is a GET request, but it contains a body, which is not RFC compliant. So let's see how the ASM behaves and if it generates a learning suggestion or not. First, let's review that request on our event logs. We can see the request here. It only triggered the same violation as before, the curl. So let's see if we got any learning suggestions. So we can see nothing here. So there was no violation related to the body in GET. So at this point, and this is what it needs to be done every time that we want to check why we are not getting any type of learning suggestions. Important thing what to check is in the learning and blocking settings page. We go here. And let's review the HTTP protocol compliance failed. And we can see here that we have body and GET head request. This will be the violation. That means if the GET or head request have a body. But we can see here that learn was not enabled. So let's enable learn and check now. Let's save and apply the policy. And we will check sending the same request again if learning suggestion is generated. Okay, ready? Go back to our client. We send our request. Let's review again on our event logs on the BKP. So we can see our request here again with the body and GET request. Now it's the same attack signature that it was triggered, but there is no other violation trigger. So most likely, if it didn't trigger any type of violation, we are not going to see anything on the traffic learning. Let's just confirm. And yes, as expected, there is nothing here. So once again, we need to check what is going on in the learning and blocking settings. Okay, so we have a violation here and the learning set, but actually is not enabled. It's not checking for HTTP protocol compliance. We will enable it, save and apply, and test again. Send our request. And review again on event logs. If now it triggered or detected that a HTTP protocol is compliant. We can see it here now, trigger the violation and the HTTP protocol compliance. So let's check now on traffic learning if we got any suggestion. And here is this suggestion to disable and relax the policy to allow this type of requests. Let's send now another type of request. Check a different example. On this request here, we're sending a post with multiple content lengths. That is actually, again, another HTTP protocol compliance, not HTTP compliant. Send our request. We review our event logs. It was valid, not any other violation that occurred. So most likely, again, we will not get any type of suggestions here on the traffic learning screen. And it's not. So we will need to review the learning and blocking settings. HTTP protocol compliance. That type of request is here, several content length headers. So this is the type of violation that we're expecting. As we can see, is set to learning, but not enable. It is not checking for that. So we will enable, save and apply, and test again to confirm if now the suggestions are triggered or generated. Let's send our request again. And let's review. It triggered the violation as suspected, the server content length headers, because it has multiple content lengths. So we will expect to see something on the traffic learning screen. But as you can see, there's nothing here. So if now we have, we now are sure that the learning checkbox is checked and the particular violation is also enabled, we now confirm that we are triggering the violation on the event logs. Why is not creating a suggestion? In this particular case, let's review the response. So when I send this request to the ASM, we can see that we get 400 bad requests as a response from the backend. So what we can check now in the policy learning and blocking settings is this. So how the policy building learn based on the response status codes. So right now it's configured to learn from the 100s, the 200s, and 300s. So even though that it trigger a violation, we are not telling the policy builder to learn from this type of response because it was generated on a 400 response. So we will just add this and to the policy, save and confirm, and check if we now get any suggestion. So by the way, this is just an example to show you another part to check when you are expecting to get a particular learning suggestion, and there is no trigger, something to check, something else to check. So same request again. Then we'll review the event logs. We have a request here. Trigger the protocol compliance failed. Let's confirm now if we got any learning suggestion. And there is. Now, because we are learning for 400 type of responses, now that I triggered the violation, the ASM will generate the suggestion to disable this type of violation. So great. Now let's move forward with our presentation. Some violations that can occur indicate a real problem with the request that cannot be learned. So these type of violations are called unlearnable violations. For example, requests for access from disallowed users, disallowed sessions, and disallowed IP addresses. In addition to those, the system considers requests that trigger HTTP protocol compliance violations to be unlearnable. And these violations are the bad HTTP version, on parsable request content, and nulling request. So they are considered unlearnable because these violations indicate behavior that is never acceptable. So the security policy will never be changed to try to allow them. Now, learning suggestions are created for requests containing these violations. So you will not expect to see any learning suggestion to be created if the request contains these type of violations. And the violation rating for this transaction is always set to the highest. It will be 5. Let's send a quick request to our lab to review this type of behavior. So what we're going to do now is just to send a simple GET request. But as you can see, we are using a HTTP protocol that is not correct. The version is 1.3. We're going to review our event logs. We can see here that it is already marked with the highest higher rating, and is the HTTP protocol compliance failed. This is the bad version. Let's just confirm if we got any suggestion about that. And as expected, there is nothing because the ISM will not create a suggestion to try to allow this type of requests. We can see here as well the type of violations that are not learnable, unlearnable. On the HTTP protocol compliance, you can see that there is no learn checkbox option for these three requests: the bad HTTP version, the null and request, and unparsable request content. So you can how entities are learned. You can adjust the learning settings for file types, URL parameters, cookies, and redirection domains. The learning settings specify when the real traffic policy builder adds or suggests you add explicit entities to the security policy. So these settings are the never, wildcard only, that specifies when a false positive occurs, the system will suggest to relax the setting of the wildcard. It will not suggest to add a new entity with relaxed settings. It will just suggest to relax the wildcards. The selective setting applies only to the wildcard entity. And when false positives occur, it will add an explicit entity with relaxed settings. This option is a good balance between security and policy size. The compact setting applies only to the wildcard and specifies that when the policy includes the most commonly used entities, while enforcing all other types with a wildcard rule. Also provides a pre-populated list of known disallowed file types and includes the top level URLs. And the last one is always, that it creates a comprehensive whitelist policy that includes all the website entities. So every time that it gets a request, if it will try to add these explicit entities to the policy. So let's review on our lab how this works. This is how entities are learned, and these settings are key also to troubleshoot if the ASM is working as expected. It is important to have a clear understanding of what each setting does to actually confirm if the ASM is not working as expected, or is actually doing its job. So now we are doing this test. We are sending a curl command, HTTP request. With a query, and we can see here a P parameter with the value of 50. We will review now our event logs, check for that request. And we can see it here. It didn't trigger any violation other than the user agent using curl. So we don't expect to see anything on the traffic learning. No suggestion. So we'll review what is the setting for parameters. It is set to selective. So that means it will just create or trigger a suggestion if there is a false positive hitting the wildcard parameter. So right now, this request hit the wildcard parameter, and if the traffic is allowed because it's actually hitting the wildcard, and there is nothing, there was and nothing to trigger, no violation to trigger. So let's send another type of request. We will do it from a Windows client. We will send, again, the P parameter, but the P parameter will contain an SQL injection attack. So let's review now. Event logs, request. We can see that it's detected all the cross-site scripting attack signatures. Let's check if it generates any traffic learning. And now here we can see that it detects that trigger a particular violation, and now it's suggesting to add the add or update the P parameter if it doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, we'll add it and relax the settings for that one. So let's go back and send another simple request using curl again. And now we are sending the query with a B parameter and a value of 50. We review our event logs. And again, nothing was triggered as happened before. So what we're going to check just quickly, there shouldn't be any suggestions to add the B parameter. So we will now change the setting for learning and blocking in parameter for this policy. And we will change the setting to always. When it's set to always, it will create a comprehensive list of entities. So we will expect now, if we send the same request, now ASM will suggest to us add these B parameters to our policy. Check on the event logs. This is a request. And what about the traffic learning? And we can see here the illegal parameter. Even though that there was no violation on the parameter scope, now that it's set to always, ASM will create this type of suggestions to add the explicit entities. So moving forward in our presentation, the learning from responses feature. When learning to build a policy, you can have the system examine responses as well as requests for entities to include in the security policy. So this is what is called learning from responses. And the system does this by default if the policy is set in automatic learning mode. And the learning from responses is also supported on the manual learning mode, but by default is not enabled, is disabled. And go back again, and just for you to bear in mind that this setting applies only to what entities can be learned from the responses content, such as URLs and parameters. The system will not learn from violations that occur on responses. For example, data guard leakage. We'll just learn and create a learning suggestion for contents like URLs or parameters. So this particular setting, if we go to our lab, you can find it here. Application, let's go back to our learning and blocking settings. And in the policy building process, we can find it here, the learning from responses. When the learning mode is set to manual, this is disabled by default. And when it's set to automatic, is enabled by default. This is a thing to look at when actually well, we're getting learning suggestions that we don't know exactly where are coming from. Let's say that a client is sending a request to a particular URL with a file.html. And the ASM generates suggestions to add the file.pdf. And at this point, we're not actually understand where this suggestion is coming from. This is the thing to check. Probably on the response of the backend server, there are reference or links or URLs or file types that in this example will be adding the .pdf. And the enforcement readiness, when you're creating a security policy at the beginning, you specify an enforcement readiness period that indicates a staging period for the entities and attack signatures. This by default typically is 7 days. When the entities or attack signatures are in staging, the system does not enforce them. Instead, the system posts learning suggestions for staged entities. So traffic will not be blocked for these staged entities. And when the enforcement readiness period is over and no learning suggestions are added to the staging period duration, which is by default is the 7 days, the file type, URLs, parameters, cookie signatures, or redirection domain is considered ready to be enforced. So particularly if you're using manual learning, you can delve into details and see what the enforcement these entities in the security policy. And from the enforcement readiness summary on the traffic learning screen, you can enforce selected entities, or you can enforce all of them, the entities and signatures that are ready to be enforced. And bear in mind, again, if you're using automatic learning mode, you can still enforce entities manually, but the policy builder, after the enforcement readiness period, if there is no more suggestions, it will enforce them for you automatically. So in our lab, in our policy, you can review the enforcement readiness periods and the policy properties. We, in this case, we leave it as by default, which is the 7 days. And the enforcement readiness summary, you can find it in the traffic learning. On the right side, you can see the traffic learning summary. And here the enforcement readiness summary. For right now, because we are within the 7 days, we just created this policy. We don't have anything on this column. But after the 7 days, if there are no more learning suggestions, all the entities will be ready to be enforced. It was set here, and then you can take actions from all, or just review one by one and then take actions. Here in the presentation, there is just a quick slide with resources that are good for you to go and take a look, and basically covering how to work with learning suggestions and refining security policies. And before we go to our summary, to end this presentation, I wanted to show you another examples that are really to know, good to know about. So let's change, by default, the learning score is set when it's 5% to 100. Let's change this to 0 to 100. And we can see here that we have a new bunch type of learning suggestions. These learning suggestions correspond to tightening learning suggestions. And as you can see here, there is no request as an example for this. So what you need to know about this, the policy tightening suggestions, is suggestions generated by ASM for requests that didn't generate a violation. So if a certain violation was not triggered for some time, the ASM will suggest let's tighten the policy and not allow this type of violation. So basically, you can accept them, but you will never see in the request on examples on the right-left panel. Basically, because there are the violations that didn't, there are the requests that didn't trigger any type of violation. So it is just a tightening tightening suggestions to secure the policy. And the other thing that we can check, let's take, for example, the illegal parameter, this one, the B. And we will ignore this suggestion. Let's ignore it, and we'll send again the request to see what happens. Review our event logs. We have our request here. Let's see if we get any suggestion. Remember that our settings for the parameter is set to always, so we should see any suggestion here for that one. And as you can see, it is not. So this is one important thing to note when customers complains that certain learning suggestions is not being generated. Another thing to go and check if at some point the learning suggestion was ignored. That means that the ASM will not keep generating or triggering that suggestion. So what you can do is go to the filter and status ignore. And we can see here that it was ignored sometime. And here you can, again, take actions if you want to accept the suggestions or delete it. If you delete a suggestion, it will just remove it from the list. But when a request that triggers that suggestion hits the virtual server again, you will see the suggestion again. Okay, so I think we're ready to wrap it up. So what we learned here is that basically Learning helps you to build as the security policy. The ASM generates learning suggestions for violation if the learn flag is enabled. This is really important to note on the learning unblocking settings. You will not get any type of learning suggestions if the learn flag is not checked. The unlearnable violations indicate a behavior that is never acceptable, so the security policy will never be changed to try to allow this type of requests. That's why on the learning and suggestion screen, you will not see suggestions for this type of violations. The key bit that we discuss is to really try to understand and review the learning settings because it affects how the ASM behaves for each of the entities. And we have the never that it will only generate suggestions to relax or modify the wildcard entity, and the others, the selective, compact, and always most likely will generate explicit entities for every request, and the selective will generate to add an explicit entities with relaxed settings. And the other thing important to bear in mind is that the ASM can learn from responses if the feature is enabled. Every time that you will see that you get suggestions that you don't understand where they're coming from, if it actually doesn't match with the request that it was sent to the VKP, probably the learning from responses feature is enabled, and that is something to check. If it is enabled and you want to confirm that where this learning suggestion is coming from, you can take a packet capture or just quickly, just for test, enable logging the response as well. Well, thank you. That will be it for today. Thank you for joining us. Hope you like it. Bye-bye.